The Magicians podcast is brought to you in proud association with the Magic Circle, Alakazam Magic, and Gigio.
Hello my friends, welcome to the Magicians podcast. My name is Richard Young, I am your host. Thank you very much for pressing the download button and welcome to the show, this very special episode with Paul Kieve, the creator of all of the magic in Ghost, The Invisible Man, and an incredible magic historian. You're going to absolutely love this episode, it's fantastic. But before we get to the interview, I just wanted to tell you about our competition we have going on at the moment. You can win the amazing Wiki Test, which was voted Trick of the Year on the Magic Cafe, and its sister trick Earworm, and also a Wiki Test Pro upgrade. All you have to do to enter the competition is get yourself onto Instagram, post a photo of wherever you are listening to this podcast, and tag us in. We are at the Magicians Podcast. Tag in my co-host at Alan Hudson Magic and the creator of Wikitest, the amazing Mark Kirstein. His username is at Magic Mark, and Mark is with a C. If you do that before the 31st of March, you'll be entered into a prize draw. The winner will receive all of those apps and upgrades. It's a fantastic competition. You really should get on it and enter right now. Great stuff. Let's check in with our great friend Alan Hudson and find out what's going on. Alan Hudson, what's going on, my friend? What have you got for me this week?
Well, I've had a brilliant week, Young. In fact, too good, I would say, because that's why my voice is now very croaky. So apologies for that. But let me start off. Saturday night, excellent night, because I had a job inquiry, and instead of me doing it, I sent my wife Kat to do it. Right. And I sat in a pub and had a few beers. So basically, I was like a sort of leech pimp.
Well, so you dropped her at the gig and then just waited in the pub across the road?
Yeah, it was in London, because we had some other stuff that we were doing in London, and I said to them beforehand, "Hey, do you want misdirection to come along and do it?" He said, and they went, "Oh yeah, sounds brilliant." And then so I walked her to the gig. I went, "There you go, have fun." And then I walked to the pub, and I sat there, and she made money.
That's amazing. Did you take her money, or did she get to keep the money?
Well, in many ways, I will get that money back. I don't know what that means.
Straight into the joint account, yeah. Right? So that's perfect.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what else happened that night. So that night, you on Instagram posted a picture on the Magicians podcast feed, and I don't know if you remember, but it was like a table, because you were doing a gig. And you were saying, did you say something like, "I'm out leeching" or something like that? Yes,
I did, yeah.
And that was good. How was that gig?
That gig, so it was in, have you been to the Four Seasons Hotel in Hampshire? I think it's quite new. And
Can't remember.
A beautiful, like 5-star, big, massive hotel. So yeah, I got booked by these people to do, there's only 14 of them in like a private dining room. And it's a nice gig on paper, and the room was pretty. So, but doesn't matter. I'm still a leech. Yeah. So I posted it on the Magicians Podcast Instagram, thinking people would find it amusing. But my goodness, did something funny happen that night?
Brilliant. Were you thinking that's good content for the podcast?
I had to. It's the only way I didn't go and jump off a bridge afterwards. Like, I had to go. Well, at least I can tell this story on the podcast. So here's what happened. I do silk in egg. You know the trick where, you make the silk turn into the egg, and it's a sucker trick. You know the one?
Everyone knows the one. You don't have to explain it. If they don't know the one, they shouldn't be listening to the podcast. Everyone knows the trick. Yeah, silk to egg.
It's a fake egg that turns into a real egg, right? So that's the important bit. So I travel to the gig with my egg in this little box thing which I have. I've used it for years, means that the egg gets to the gig safely. Anyway, I was sort of getting everything ready, and I realised there was like a fracture, a hairline fracture on the egg. Not where it was leaking, but where I thought, you know what, I don't want that. I don't want to use that egg because it might break on me before it's meant to.
Right.
And so I asked, bear in mind, it's a 5-star hotel, right? Posh hotel.
Yeah.
So I go and see the guy. He's sort of showing me where I'm going. I go, "Hey, listen, could you help me out? Do you by any chance have in the kitchen another egg. I explain the situation. I show him the fake egg. I said, look, it needs to sort of match this one. It needs to be the same colour, same sort of size. He goes, no problem, leave it with me. So he goes off. He's gone quite a long time. But I come back to my box a little bit later after I've been doing a bit of close-up. And sure enough, there's the fake egg back on my box and a real egg next to it. Perfect. Great match. Happy boy.
Right.
An hour or so later, I'm doing my little cabaret for all these people. And basically, I get to the the best bit where you're about to reveal that it's a real egg. Going to crack it in the glass.
Yeah.
No, he's hard-boiled it, hasn't he? He's hard-boiled the egg. Of course he has. It's a 5-star hotel, right? I go to crack it on the glass. Nothing's happening, right? I'm looking around. I'm looking for you, first of all, thinking you've screwed me over. No, he's hard-boiled the egg. Actually, do you know, it was kind of great, because it was only 14 people, and I just told them what had happened. They thought it was hilarious. They got it. So,
what did you...
Yeah,
did you then peel the egg?
Well, yeah, I kind of had to peel the egg and
Right.
show that it's it's not quite, how like detail is important with magic. It's not quite the same impact
It's
when
not.
you
It's
peel
not.
an
It's
egg.
not the flourish you want, is it?
It's not really. The beauty is the crack, crack, crack into the glass. Hold the glass up, toast. Yeah.
Oh,
there
do you know
go.
what? Well, I'm glad you had a good story, because I think people were disappointed last week when you asked about the Chinese gig, and then I went, oh yeah, it was all right really, and I had no story about it. So yeah, I'm glad you had that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, so it was literally when it went like that. I thought, oh well, at least I've got something I can tell on the podcast this week. So it's getting harder for us, isn't it? This is what, episode 14 of the series, to keep every week talking about what's going on, when, let's be honest, it's magic, so most of the time there's nothing going on.
Yeah, I realised this before, that there was if there's 24 episodes and then I tell 2 stories or whatever, per week, that's 48 stories. I haven't got 48 stories. I haven't got 48 funny stories. But so let me tell you this, right? So I have remembered one. And it's a gig story, so you like it.
Oh, good.
And
good. Hopefully, where it all goes badly wrong, right?
And yeah, obviously I don't end up. I'm not like Alan Partridge. Needless to say, I had the last laugh, right? Which is what most magicians do, don't they? They go, oh, anyway, at the end, I stormed it. I was brilliant.
Yeah, terrible.
No, it's not one of them. So this is when I was. Somebody reminded me of this the other day. It was great, and so I was on a cruise ship. Right, when I was about 20, and when I say cruise ship, I mean Cross Channel ferry.
Yes, that's the truth.
That is the truth. And I got on board, and I thought my first gig was the day after, right? So I thought the first day I had off, and then about an hour before showtime, I had a knock on my cabin saying, "Where are you? We haven't even done a tech run through. Your first show's in an hour." I thought the first night
no.
I was just gonna have it off, walk around the cabin, go and watch the show that was on and stuff like that, get my bearings and stuff. I went an hour. I'd not even unpacked the case, right? So, and bearing in mind this is my first big job, right? Before then I'd done holiday parks and stuff like that, but to me this was a big deal. So I got all my stuff together. I ran down to the theatre. I put all my props backstage, and then I put them all into my table, and then this was with minutes to go. I wheeled the table out, and he said, right, I'm going to bring you on in 5 minutes. Introduced me. I came on. I said, hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Alan Hudson. I'm going to do a miracle for you, because I had brilliant patter when I was 20. and I went, gentleman in the front row, what's your name? And he just stared at me, right? And I went, what's your name? Again, I pointed at him. You in the front row, what's your name? Right. Turns out this guy was German, and he could not speak a word of English. Right. As it turns out, most of the audience couldn't either. Right. This is a Harwich to Hamburg trip, and just these lorry drivers or whatever, they just couldn't speak English. Also, a thick northern accent, and I was speaking fast because I was nervous. Doesn't help, right?
That's not going to go well.
Yeah. So I went, it's all right. Just think of a card in the deck and name it out loud. Obviously, didn't understand that. Right. And I thought, right, I'm going to leave him because he's not answering anything. And then so I went to the woman next to him. Right. Obviously, his wife. Right. who had the same level of English that he did. Right? And then I went round their little table at the front going, can you name a card? Can you name a card? Can you name a card? They all just stared at me. Now,
It's getting desperate.
I've been on stage at this point now for, I reckon, about 4 minutes, and all I'd done is shouted at people in the audience with no answer. Right? And then
And nothing's happened.
nothing answered. Right? And then
It's like most mentalists.
it is, yeah.
It is.
And then eventually I went, I need somebody to name a card, and some bloke shouted the 3 of diamonds, whatever it was. And I thought, I can save it because I'm going to do the brilliant trick. And the trick, and you might recognise this trick, I was going to go into my pocket, pull out a deck of cards. There is one card turned over, one card only. Lo and behold, the 3 of diamonds. Right,
Amazing.
That was the trick, right?
Yeah.
So, but I patted on my pocket, looking for my invisible deck. Not there.
Oh no!
Right, it was not in my pocket.
So you've been
right?
rushed on.
I've been rushed on, and I got everything else there for my other tricks later on, but I put all the other things in the table, but I'd not got the deck in my pocket, because you can't go behind the table and get it, because you might have, 52 decks in there or something. It's got to be sort of
Got to be out there.
Yeah. So, and then I thought, oh God, because it's took me so long to get this card, I can't just do a gag and go correct. I thought, what am I going to do? And then I remembered that it must be on the side in the dressing room. So I thought, well, the only thing I can do now is go and get that deck. So I ran off stage, and it wasn't quite where I thought it was going to be. And then it took me, I reckon, about another minute to find it, right? I was picking stuff up, throwing it about, throwing my clothes about. I managed to find it, and I went, oh my God, I've got it, this is it, I've got it. So then I rushed out on stage, and I thought, I can save this. I went, check this out, 3 of diamonds, you say. Spread out the cards, one card turned over, and I went, there it is, the 3 of diamonds. It got nothing, right? Got absolutely nothing, and I couldn't work out why. And it was only afterwards I worked out. And speaking to people, they all thought I'd just got a deck of cards and then turned it over in the dressing room. See, to me, I was still doing a great trick because I was still doing an invisible deck. But I forgot about the effect on the audience, which is a man asks for a card, he goes off stage for about a minute, comes on with their deck of cards, spreads through it, and then it's turned over. You go, it's like a 5-year-old wouldn't even come up with that.
Hey, at least it was a ferry and not a cruise ship, eh? At least that's something.
And then, and I'll tell you what happened with that, which is I was supposed to do 30 minutes every night. They cancelled me to doing 10 minutes each night. And then said the other 20 minutes you can just entertain the kids.
Oh, that's bad, isn't it? That is bad.
Yeah. I had to do that for 2 months.
Oh, must have been the longest 2 months of your life, was it?
It was. Oh, it was incredible. I've never done it again, obviously. So yeah, that's a gig story.
That's a great story.
So let me tell you about the rest of my weekend. Right. So I said on Saturday night, Kat was out doing a gig. We stayed in London because we had fun and stuff to do. On the Sunday night, we went to see Tim Vine, supported by John Archer. Very good. I'll come back to that in a second. Following night, Michael McIntyre was doing a warm-up gig before he does like the big O2s or whatever he does, or Wembley, in a small theatre.
So when you say warm-up, do you mean like a new material kind of thing?
Yeah, new material, yeah.
Yeah.
So like, I mean, often comedians will do like a warm-up in a small comedy club with 30, 40 people or something. And it's classic McIntyre to sell out a West End theatre of 400 people to do his warm-up, But then, why wouldn't you?
Oh, I'm fascinated to know what that was like.
The difference between them is the thing that's interesting. So
Yes.
when Tim Vine and John Archer won, they were having the best time. Right, so Archer opens,
Yes.
he's fantastic, right? He is brilliant, right? He's excellent, and you could see he was having a great time, and he was doing all material I'd never seen before as well, because I've not seen him for a couple of years perform. So it was great to watch. Plays the ukulele, people love it, right? Great time. Tim Vine comes on. You've seen him, right? He's upbeat, he's going way, right, and just gag
Amazing.
all the way through. Goes off at the end, comes back on. They were filming for the DVD as well, so I mean they were really on it. And then comes back on for the encore. Did all the pen behind the ear stuff and some of the old classic sort of the greatest hits, right? Vine's greatest hits, right? Brilliant. Everybody left that theatre on a real high. It could not have been more different for Michael McIntyre.
Really?
Yeah, so because McIntyre is well known for coming on.
This guy's like the top of the mountain, isn't he? So was it just the new material just didn't work? Is that what you're saying, or
no? The material was good actually. It did really. Some of the jokes and some of the routines are really good, but he kind of looked like he didn't want to be there. So
wow.
And I don't know if this is correct, but that's how it came across to me. He looked like he didn't want to be there. He walked on with a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, right, and just sort of. So he had a support act in the first half. It was good, and then came on in the second half. Cup of tea. Just you could just tell he didn't want to be there, and he went, "Oh, hi guys, yeah, we're going to do some stuff." And he had his notes with him, which you're allowed to do when you're trying out material. And then he started very slowly, and then got into his rhythm a little bit. But what was weird is by 9:15, he kept on looking at his watch from about 9 o'clock, I'd say, and then 9:05 came, 10 past. By 9:15, he was almost mid joke when he just went. Oh, that's it. That's all for me. I'm going now. Right, see ya. Bye. And then just walked off. And I thought, oh, he's going to do like a fake bit now and come back on and do like a couple of big routines to finish off. No, that was it. House lights came on.
That is utterly bizarre. I've never heard of anything like that in my life.
Yeah, so the difference.
It's like he found out he wasn't getting paid or something. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah. Well, maybe he's used to doing big, 10,000 seater whatevers, arenas, and then doing 400 in a Western theatre. Just don't get his heart going anymore. I don't know. And it just goes to show actually about you've always got to try. Like you never, you should never not try, even if your heart's not really in it. You've still got to give it a go. And and I'll tell you why I bring that up. It's because it reminded me of a story. Somebody was getting their promo video filmed, right? A magician at tables, right? And so doing the close up at the tables, they looked at it afterwards, the footage, when the guy sent it back to them, and they went, I saw the footage, and I was dead behind the eyes, right? Dead, dead behind the eyes. And then said, and bear in mind, this was when I was being filmed. This was when I was actually trying. Have you heard that story before?
Yeah, because it was me.
It was you. Do you remember that?
Yeah, that's what happened to me. Yeah, paid a guy to come in. I remember I got my hair cut and got my suit dry cleaned and did it all. Got all my props all nice because it's the night I'm filming my promo. I got the footage back and you could just tell I didn't want to be there. It was terrible. Oh dear. Well, that's the end of my close-up magic career right there, isn't it? Well, that's okay. It doesn't matter because at least we make good podcasts, even if I don't make good close-up magic promos. And with that in mind, very excited about this week's episode, Hudson, are you?
I am, yeah. Paul Kieve. I met Paul Kieve once. Let me tell you this, right? Can I just tell you my Paul Kieve story? I met him in New York in 2012, and I just started dating my girlfriend, who is now my wife.
The lovely cat.
And the lovely cat. And I thought, obviously, I'll take her to New York, right? Because that'll really impress her.
Good move. Right?
Yeah. And we arrived there. We got into Times Square, and there was we saw like a hubbub of loads of people crowded round this celebrity, right? And bearing in mind, I'd only been seeing Kat for a few months at this point, right? Probably 6 months, right? Maybe, right? So this is like she didn't really know me that well. And so we saw this celebrity with loads of people around. We couldn't see who it was, but there was obviously like a bit of fuss. And we went, oh, like who's it going to be? Like Brad Pitt, Tom Cruise, right? Who's it going to be? So we went, oh, let's go and see who it is. And then we went over, and it was Dynamo.
Oh, right, okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And then he turned and sort of went, all right, what are you doing here? Right, and came over and sort of, gave a hug. And I went, oh, this is my girlfriend, Kat. And then he went, oh, great, do you want to meet up in a few days? I've got a day off filming and go for a coffee and stuff, right? So we did. So Kat was, like, she was well impressed at this stage, right? Going, oh my God, we've been here 5 minutes, big celebrity, and you know him, right? Amazing, right?
That's a pretty
so
good.
already,
That's pretty good.
already, yeah. I'm that's good points, right?
You got a big tick in the box there, yeah, definitely.
I did, right? That was good, right? Then next night we went to this this fancy restaurant called Teo, right? And sat down next to me. Who's there? Paul Kieve.
Wow.
Right, and then so I go. We sat down. This is in New York. Right, I sat down and I turn and go, "Hi, Paul. How's it going?" And then, so all of a sudden, Kat is going, "Who is this guy?" Right?
He knows everybody.
He knows everyone in New York, right? And it's right, it's the most well-connected man. And Paul Kieve was sat with Spider-Man.
Oh wow! Really?
Not the real Spider-Man, obviously.
Yeah, you know, the guy playing Spider-Man in the Broadway musical.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we were going to see that in a few nights' time. So Paul very kindly arranged with this guy to come down and meet us afterwards to say hello to us. So that was another brilliant thing. So we watched the show, and then Spider-Man came down. And he said, "Oh, stay in your seats." And then came down and had a little chat with us afterwards. So yeah.
Didn't that musical go on to be the musical that lost the most money of all time on Broadway?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I Can't Sing in England lost a lot, didn't it? Do you remember that?
Did it? I don't remember that.
Yeah, I thought that was going to run. 6 weeks it lasted.
Oh really? Yeah, that's bad. That is bad.
But yeah, no, so that was it was very good of Paul actually, and because I didn't really know him that well, and I'd only met him a couple of times, and weirdly I'd met him because we were both fans of Dynamo. We got chatting one night at Blackpool, and Dynamo was before he was famous, doing his tricks, and me and Paul started chatting about how we really like him. So so it all came together.
Well, Paul talks about Dynamo in this interview. He also talks about all of the shows which he's worked on. And did you ever see Ghost the musical?
Yes, I did.
Do you remember all the incredible magic in that show?
Amazing.
And I didn't know how it was done.
No, me neither.
I do now because I recorded this podcast. Paul is about to share with us all on this podcast the secret of how that incredible vanish was done at the end of Ghost, and give us an amazing insight into all the tech behind it and how it all came together. So that's, I think people are going to absolutely love this podcast. If you ever saw Ghost the musical and you wanted to know what was really going on that stage, you're about to find out. Well, do you know what? Because I know what you're about to hear, I know you are absolutely going to love this podcast, because you're about to find out about how a lot of this magic was pulled off. And,
great.
The rest of it, so it's going to be great. Look forward to speaking to you again next week about it, Hudson. Thank you for your contributions today.
Yeah, lovely.
This is going to be great. Here he is, the man himself, finally on the Magicians Podcast. This is Mr. Paul Kieve. Paul Kieve, welcome to the Magicians Podcast.
Thank you very much.
You've been a tough man to nail down. I've been trying to get you on this for years. You've given me more of a runaround than Paul Daniels did, just to let you know. Yeah, thanks for doing it. I really appreciate it. Last week we had Dominic Wood on, 1995 Young Magician of the Year. You, runner-up, Young Magician of the Year, 1985.
1985, yeah.
Yeah,
10 years
amazing.
before.
Tell me about that act. How did that go?
I was assisted by my sister Karen, and we were doing, I suppose, quite a classic act, really. You know, silks and candles. I mean, in that era, everybody wanted to be Lawrence Burton.
Yes.
Or the Pendragons, and I didn't have the muscles for the Pendragons. So it was kind of quite classic, and we'd won the Reading Junior Day, and we went into it for a bit of a laugh. Young Magician of the Year was a lot of fun, but I remember I was disappointed. Like, coming runner-up was almost worse than coming third.
Ah, it's a terrible place to be.
And third was Scott Penrose that year.
Was he really?
Yeah, but no, it was great fun to do it. And at that time, it was at the Polka Theatre in Wimbledon, which is a beautiful little theatre. And I do remember my great memory of that night was, you know, being disappointed coming second, but also pleased that we had been placed. And afterwards, David Berglas came over, and he was really lovely and really supportive and encouraging. And that's the first time I ever met David, and I've been, you know, friends with him ever since. So it was a great day, and I think Young Magician of the Year was a real encouragement to put, you know, proper stage acts together, which was a good thing.
So how do you then end up in a double act?
I decided to turn full-time pro, whatever that meant, you know. And at that time, there were places you could work with a silent act. And I went and did a summer season in Jersey in 1986, and then I was working a lot of nightclubs in London. I mean, there was an amazing circuit of Xenon nightclub and the Eve Club, you know, which was the club I think that the Profumo affair started, you know. And these you could do 2 nightclubs in a night with a 5 or 10 minute silent act. But I had this female assistant, and then my assistant, as happens, got a job in pantomime. And years before, I'd met a magician called Lawrence Layton, who lived in Gents Hill. And I think he'd performed at a birthday party that my younger brother was at. And we met, and he'd been asking me for years to do a double act. And I was saying, I'm just not going to do it. I'm not interested.
Is that because you knew you had to split the money?
I think I didn't want to split the ideas. I didn't want to have to argue about ideas. And I didn't feel that that's what I wanted to do because, you know, it didn't seem like a good plan. And then I lost my assistant, and so did Lawrence. And I said, well, all right, I'll do it for a couple of months. And I think that was at the end of 86. So we put this act together, which was, I mean, it was pretty terrible. And but what we did put together was Lawrence's father worked in publishing, and we got this manager, and his name was John Warwick, and he did nothing for us at all. He did absolutely nothing, except his girlfriend was a graphic designer, and she designed this beautiful brochure. And we went to Lawrence's dad and got the brochure printed. And we had like the best brochure in the business. It was like a 3-fold brochure. So we had a brochure long before we had an act. And we were called the Zodiac Brothers. And we were 2, young, I used to joke and say we were the bar mitzvah boys of magic. Afterwards, I look back. And we were quite marketable to cruise ships and different things. And we had this great publicity material. So we'd send it out, and to be honest, Lawrence was really pushy. He was the more pushy one, and I was always the one going, oh, it's not ready and we shouldn't do it. And it was a good combination, actually, because I probably would never have done anything. And Lawrence was like, no, it's going to be great, we're going to do it. And then we were booked for a showcase, and at the showcase, I don't even know if they have showcases anymore. Yeah. But anyway, we were booked for New Faces of 87. The TV show. At that time, they would go around and they'd book you properly as an act and pay you properly. And I mean, we had a 40-piece orchestra write our music and play our music, and Harry Stoneham write the kind of arrangements. So it was a proper gig, and we performed it at the Birmingham Hippodrome. And I think at that same gig, we were booked for a 6-month season in Japan. And I can honestly say it was like 4 years just went by because we were just booked quite a lot. And I think we were just very marketable. And you know the old song from Gypsy, you got to have a gimmick. Well, I think that's so true, and I think people don't always realise that, because I think when I say we were terrible, I think we ended up being okay, and we took our magic seriously, and people would go, oh, who was that act? The two brothers? Well, it could only have been us, couldn't it? Yes. So as long as we were okay, people remembered us, and that's a big part of being booked, is be memorable, have a gimmick, if you like. We didn't intentionally do that, but we were unusual in that we weren't a boy act with a female assistant. Yeah, but it was a lot of fun, and we worked together until 1991.
Can I take a little bit of a sidestep at this point, away from your timeline of events, because you were the Zodiac Brothers and you said you were the Bar Mitzvah Boys of Magic? It's an interesting connotation of what's going on at the moment, in that we've got the Ehrlich Brothers, and they consider themselves the rock stars of magic.
They've got it right, haven't they? They play stadiums, we were playing bar mitzvahs.
I'm just fascinated to know what you think of them, actually, and I'm sure you've looked at their work. I mean, I've seen upstairs today your amazing collection of History of Illusion, and do these boys, does their work connect with you in terms of how contemporary it is?
I know this is really bad, but I don't really know that much of their work, and I'm going to go and see them, because I don't. If I know I'm going to have a chance to see something live, I will tend to try and avoid watching loads of YouTube videos. And I've seen them do that wonderful thing with the sort of giant iPad, and I thought it was terrific. I mean, the only thing is, I just don't know how you can do magic in that size of an arena. Of course, I have done lots of arena shows, and I also obviously worked on the Dynamo show that went to the O2, but it certainly wasn't at its best at the O2, and I just don't know about that thing I think there's a whole thing about performers in those massive arenas, that you can't actually see and you have to watch them on a screen. But I think they've obviously carved an amazing market, and nowadays people really love seeing things in an arena. At some point promoters realised how, they could make a killing on the fact that people were actually having a much lesser experience, but they'd pay for the experience of an arena.
Yeah.
Houdini didn't play arenas. There weren't any, I suppose. But back then, if you couldn't see the artist, you'd probably want to pay less. And now it seems like if you can't see the artist, you pay more.
Yeah.
Because it's that feeling of being in an arena. And of course, it was Eddie Izzard, the first as a comedian, started doing arenas. So it's an interesting idea. And I'm really looking forward to seeing them in, whenever they're here.
April the 6th. We've been talking about it on the podcast.
It's interesting that they've decided on that kind of idea, and they've become that. But of course, David Copperfield kind of was the rock star of magic, and when he performed in the UK twice, and the first time I think was actually at Earl's Court.
Yeah, that's correct. 1994.
And the second time was at Hammersmith Apollo. And when he found out how big Earl's Court was, he wasn't happy at all. And that's why he came back and did Hammersmith, because for him it was too big, and he didn't like the fact people were watching things on screens. So it'll be interesting to see I think the experience is very different in an arena, and it seems like they've nailed that for magic. So I'm a live magic person, and so it's going to be, I'm going to look forward to seeing them live, but I haven't watched tons of their stuff on YouTube.
You did just mention then, that was one of my questions a bit later on, but it seems right to talk about it now because you've mentioned it. You did work on the Dynamo Arena tour.
Yeah.
Again, you had the similar problem, massive rooms, a magic show. What was your involvement with that show in particular? What did you work on?
Well, I've known Dynamo from, many, many years ago. It's funny, we were just sitting at Blackpool in the Ruskin Hotel and saying this is actually the room that we met, probably 22 years ago. And we're never quite sure why we became friends, because actually Dynamo was really into close-up and I was always into illusions. But we always at Blackpool used to end up sitting in the corner of the Ruskin having a really good chinwag. And because of that, all the way through, we've been in contact from time to time. And I remember when he first met Dan Albion, and I was living in my other house in Hackney, because I've been in Hackney for 22 years now. And Stephen said, could I bring my manager over? And I remember, Dan and Dynamo coming into the house, and we sort of had a chat. And I was really impressed that he kind of had a manager, and that Dan was so behind him, and it's an incredible thing, like he's been so behind him all the way through, even though they had like real, it was really questionable whether they'd get, there wasn't opportunities for TV then. And then I remember when Ghost was in the West End, it was just when he got Magician Impossible, and I remember the buses going around the West End, and some of them had Ghost on, some of them had Dynamo on Magician Impossible, and I was really excited to see that he'd broken through. I've never really been involved with the TV shows at all, but I think they always saw me as the live, so Dan would occasionally call me in to talk about, would you think we could do a live thing? And one day Dan called me in and he said, well, think about doing Dynamo Live. And I said, what you must do is go to like really small theatres at first and try it out, give it a chance to bed in, and just do small venues. And then about a year later had another call from Dan and said, we booked the tour. I said, great, wait, what small venues you booked? Actually, it's like an arena tour. I was like, oh Christ. But I brought in the director, I brought in the lighting designer. I was very instrumental in how the show, I worked with Stu Fish, who were the designers, to make the show happen. Had a wonderful team. I mean, Dynamo, considering the pressure he was under on that show, was just so lovely to everybody, which, actually can't be said for all the actual crew that were working on it, who were actually very difficult. I'm not talking about the magic crew, I'm talking about the people that really had, should have known better. It wasn't the easiest setup, and but he was great, and I brought in this director, Tom Caruso, who'd worked on Matilda as the associate director from America, and he was like a strict schoolmaster, which is what certainly we all needed, because it was all put together really quite late. And I kind of designed the levitation and worked out how that should be, and I brought in Alan Bartlett, who I'd worked with on Matilda, who's the Royal Shakespeare Company head draftsman, who really knows his stuff technically. So I guess I was involved with all elements of it in a way, but there was a great team. Rory Adams was on it, and Harry de Cruz, and I remember, for example, like the phone in bottle was funny, because at one point they were like, well, shall we not do it? And I said, you've got to do the phone in bottle. And you can ask any of that team. I said, we are going into that rehearsal room, like whenever it was, and we're all going to go in, and we're not coming out until we've got a method. And it was actually a fantastic day because it was genuinely collaborative. I remember, I came up with a certain sort of bold, thing, I suppose, coming from theatre. I'm like, let's be practical about it, and it's got to be a self-contained routine, and it's got to be in one section. And then Dee had this great idea of getting 2 spectators out with, and then Rory, I think, added another thing, and Harry added something else, and also Robert Pound was, also there and helped with the technical aspect of it. And I think if you ask any of that team, it was like, it was genuinely, really collaborative, especially that sequence. And I'll tell you what I'll say about it, and I know, he's a friend of mine and I really admire him, but he was a star in that show. And I'll tell you what I mean, in that people really wanted to be with him. Like, you can tell when the audience want to be with the performer.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like, there's a comfort. Like, as soon as he walked out on stage and there was this roar, and he was incredibly relaxed on stage because he kind of is himself. And that is actually extremely hard to do.
So you first did some consultancy work in the mid-'80s. You worked on a Sade, a music video, and I've heard the story before where you were like a hand double for her and you famously had to shave your arms,
yes,
paint your nails. But I think the kind of first big thing where you were given kind of like a big project was 1991. You did The Invisible Man, and you've already mentioned 1991 was the end of the Zodiac Brothers. I'm really interested. Please tell me, and go into as much detail as you want, the transition from performer to consultant.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting one because I'm still not quite sure why I stopped performing, but I think one of the things which is probably interesting is that we were very ambitious in the Zodiac Brothers, and we wanted to. We were closing acts at the Magic Castle in 1991 at the beginning, and then we also got the Ron Lucas show, which at that point it was very difficult to get on British TV as a visual act, and John Fisher booked us for the Ron Lucas show, and it was during the Ron Lucas show and the Magic Castle that I decided I really didn't want to be in a double act anymore. And
is that because you realised you had to split the money?
No, it really wasn't. I didn't want to have to be working in that way, and I could see us working on cruise ships more and more. And a massive effect, this is a slightly negative story, but it's funny. But it's true, is obviously one of my idols was Siegfried and Roy. And I'd seen them, I was very fortunate to see them at 17 when they were at the Tropicana, I think. And then I went back out, and it was just when the Mirage show was opening. And Lawrence and I were there, I think at that point with my sister, my late sister, because unfortunately she passed away in 1995. But we were out in Vegas, and we found out it was previewing just for staff, and we were like, well, we've got to see it. We have to get in somehow. And we asked everybody. They're like, you will never get in.
Please tell me you stole some uniforms or something.
Yeah, you will never get in. You will never get in. And we're like, we have to get in. We finally find someone. They say the only way is to ask Bernie Human, their manager, whose nickname is Barely Human. Who I've actually since worked with, and he's absolutely delightful. But he's the archetypal showbiz Vegas manager, and quite a scary figure, to go up to. So that I just remember going up to him and saying, "We're magicians from England. We're massive fans of Siegfried and Roy. And we had it all worked out." And he just kept going, so, and then we just kept going, and he went, "Come in, guys." And we were there, and we saw a preview of Siegfried and Roy.
Wow.
It was hilarious. I remember, Siegfried didn't know where he was on the stage. The elephant got stuck. The elephant shat on the stage. The cloth got caught. So we saw Siegfried and Roy. We saw that incredible show. And then a year later exactly, we were back in Vegas. Because I think that's when we played the Magic Castle. And then the Larsons had arranged for us to meet them afterwards. And they were kind of our idols, in a way. And they'd arranged tickets, and we sat down, and they were always incredibly hospitable, Siegfried and Roy, to visiting magicians. And we sat down, and they had this incredible set that was designed by the British set designer John Napier, who you'll know from Cats and Miss Saigon, Helicopter, and all these iconic, Starlight Express, iconic, huge British musicals.
You just reminded me, I do want to talk to you about another helicopter before the end of the podcast.
Oh, Whose is that?
It's a magician. You probably saw his Vegas show, Steve Wyrick.
Oh yeah.
And he had a great helicopter illusion.
Iconic.
We'll talk about that later on.
We will.
Sorry.
But anyway, so John Napier, this incredible set, and the first thing that happened was this huge disc that lifted up, and it was like a good and evil story. They were on another planet, and there was beautiful inhabitants, and then the evil queen arrives, and then all the inhabitants are kind of trapped underground, and this huge disc descends again. And this disc ends up being where the elephant appears at the end of the show. But the disc comes up, and I remembered the show, and all the people go underneath, and then nothing happens, and the disc is stuck, and we're waiting, and all the people are waving about, and suddenly the stage goes dark, and I get a tap on the shoulder, and it's one of Siegfried and Roy's assistants, and says, "Mr. Siegfried would like to see you backstage." Because the show's being cancelled. They hadn't announced it to the audience yet, so they took us backstage, and Siegfried was standing in the corridor. And he was like, "I'm sorry guys, the show is cancelled tonight because of a technical thing, but I'd like to invite you to the dressing room for a drink." So we're sat in this dressing room, and there's like literally Roy's like taking the tigers back, behind. And there we are with this. I had met him once before, but just like for a photo. And here we are. I sat with him, and he was fascinated because we were also a double act. So he was going, and it was funny because after we actually broke up, when I told him we'd broken up, he said, why did you break up the double act? And I said, well, we just had decided to do artistic, different things. And he went, rubbish! I know you have big fights, you have big arguments, because he knows double acts are not easy, are they? And but anyway, we sat there, and I realised, and I have the greatest respect for these guys. This is 1 year into their contract that Siegfried was already bored.
Wow.
And I just felt this, and he told us a lot about Vegas, and I just got this sense, and I sort of suddenly went, wow, you could have all this, and actually, what is it? I don't know, for some reason it had an effect on me that made me realise maybe that I didn't want to always be doing the same thing, like the same act or the same.
I think we as magicians, we're very ambitious, and we always want progress, don't we?
Yeah.
In whatever form that comes.
But I think it was also, it was weird how I ended up in performing, because I suppose I was quite shy as a kid. I wasn't centre of attention type person, and I think I loved magic. I loved watching magic. I suppose I was, a decent enough performer to get into the Young Magician of the Year and all that stuff. But I don't know if I was ever really that addicted to it. And I also wasn't that sure about travelling all the time, and I sort of felt like there were all these things maybe going around in my head. I hadn't really sorted out my personal life. I was and I think that was just another thing where I went, I'm not sure about this whole thing, actually, about being stuck in a show in Vegas for 10 years doing the same thing. And Siegfried just couldn't have been nicer, and it was an amazing night. And but I think that was one of the factors that I went, I'm not sure about this, actually, and also being in the double act, I felt very restricted in it. We had too many restrictions. Lawrence didn't want me to do anything outside the act because it might threaten the act, and it was right, because we really were loyal to each other, and we really stuck together and did all those things. And then we did the Ron Lucas show, and I was like, actually, that's it. And I literally kind of handed in my notice because I applied to go to university because I'd left school at 17, and I was like, I wanted to go into some kind of direction, or I didn't really know. I just wanted something different. And so I literally threw the whole thing out. I threw the baby in the bathwater out, gave up the act. Our last contract was on the QE2, 1991, June. 3 days before we finished was a Royal Gala, and we were on the ship with Paul Daniels. He was also on the ship. And I got off the ship, and I remember getting the train to London because all the stuff was being taken by a transport company. And I remember thinking, I have no idea what I'm going to do next. While we were in the double act, and before, there was a local theatre, the Theatre Royal Stratford East, and we always used to do try out our acts there. And we used to perform on the stage with everybody sat around you, having drinks, and it was a little jewel of a theatre in the East End. And but even before the double act, I was trying out stuff there, visual act. My mum was friends with Kate Williams, the actress, and who used to host it. And this is one of these amazing serendipity things. But the day after I got off the ship, and it was not an easy time because my sister unfortunately suffered from mental illness, and I came off the ship to find out she really wasn't well, and I moved out of my where I was living because I moved out of home because my mum was like, it's too stressful for you to be at home with what's going on. So I moved into this shitty little flat in Ilford, which was miserable. And I remember sitting in there, and the day after I got off the ship, my phone rang, and it was the production manager from the Theatre Royal Stratford East. And he said, we're doing a production of The Invisible Man. Do you think you might be available to work on it? Now, at no point in the previous 4 years would I have been, but on that day I was, from that day onwards. And I went in and I met Ken Hill, who was directing it. And that show was the thing that I suppose changed my life. So it was it linked to the performing, because I'd done acts at the Stratford East, so that's why they kind of knew that maybe I'd be interested in visual magic. But that timing was incredible. There's been about 3 times in my life that I feel like there's been a magic serendipity.
Something, yeah.
There's been about 3 that were absolutely like, wow, that was meant to be.
Yeah.
And that was the transition. And then we sort of move on to, Invisible Man and working on the 45 effects in that show, whatever it was.
You did mention, though, in amongst what you just said there, about how you were a bit confused in your professional life and also a bit confused in your personal life as well in terms of where you were going. And we walked here from the train station.
Yeah.
I wonder if you would, because we've never had anyone talk about it on this podcast, and it was amazing what you said about what it was like to be gay in London in the mid 80s, early 90s, and it was.
What on earth are you insinuating? As Catherine Tate would say.
You said it was a tricky time, right? And
yeah,
also you're making this big change in your professional life as well.
Well, I think it was all tied in, and I suspect it was why I went into magic. Yeah, I think it's interesting because people don't talk about it much, not in the magic world. It's very interesting because sometimes people say, "I didn't know you were gay. Are you in the closet about it or something?" And I was like, "Well, never been." And it just doesn't really come up in conversation. But it's great, because now you've got people like Darren, who it was amazing when Darren came out, and I suppose I shouldn't mention other people because they might not want me to. But I mean, I was going to mention people that are out and have relationships and they're completely relaxed about it. And I remember because Darren's a good friend of mine, and I remember when he first came out, which was on to the Sunday Express, Sunday Independent, and he meant, and it was like he mentioned it, and then we had a little drink over here, I think, because came over with his partner Mark at the time, and then a year later, the Sun ran this headline like Mindbender or something, and he was like, "But I've already come out." And it was so not a thing that the Sun managed to run it as a kind of a story a year later.
Yeah.
And I just thought when he did Miracle and he sat on the stage and talked about it so openly, I said to him afterwards, I said, "That is incredible that you did that." And he was like, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, it's just, because any one of those shows, you're going to have a certain number of people in the audience that haven't come out, or they are confused about it, or they feel very nervous about it." Because I think now, because it's more talked about, people don't realise that everyone who comes out, everyone that's gay, has had a journey, has had a difficult journey. It might be that they're worried they're going to be rejected. Some of them have been rejected. Their parents don't accept. Maybe one parent accepts, maybe the other one doesn't. Even in London, even today, and you forget about I've got friends from Hungary and Romania, places like that. It's very, very difficult still. And we're, and in the 80s, I mean, a heavy thing to talk about on the podcast, but I was in my first summer season in Jersey, and I met a wonderful chap called Gerard Casey. He was in one of the other shows, and we started kind of dating, and we call it. And it was actually illegal in Jersey to be gay, but then to put it in perspective, it was also illegal to hang your washing out in the garden, and it was also illegal to dance on a Sunday. So that was Jersey in the 1980s. But I literally sort of came out to my parents, and within like a month, it was like the Don't Die of Ignorance AIDS campaign, and it was really shocking. And then it was like Section 28 with Margaret Thatcher, and it was really political. I remember going on really political marches and like campaigning for equal age of consent and the withdrawal of Clause 28, which was actually stopping teachers from even mentioning it in schools. But it was a sort of dark period then, and when you look at like the entertainment world, like nobody was coming out then, And it was like big news when somebody did, and the headlines were terrible. All the tabloids were just ripping people apart, and of course, it was a very tragic time. As if you look at Bohemian Rhapsody in the film, the story of, and that wasn't great. You were growing up and you were seeing some of these very few people that were obviously gay, and they were people like Freddie Mercury. When I went to see that film, it was difficult, because I remember somebody said, but you must have loved Freddie Mercury. I was like, yeah, but I hated what happened to him, because it was like, that's what you didn't want to see. You wanted to see somebody being fine and okay. And there were plenty of those people about, but they just weren't highlighted.
Yes.
And there was groups like Bronski Beat, who were very, at the time it was such a huge thing to come out. And now it's like nothing, now it's like everyone wants to, in terms of entertainment.
We do live in a much better world now, don't we? There's no doubt about that.
I think we do. But so that was interesting. I've never been asked that on a magic interview.
Well, thank you for sharing it. I think we're going to need to take a quick commercial break, Paul. Kieve will be right back.
Whether you're new to magic or a seasoned professional, Alakazam Magic are here to help. Alakazam have been supplying magic to magicians for well over 20 years. Not only do we carry all the latest and greatest magic tricks, books and DVDs, but we also manufacture one of the finest ranges of magic tricks in the world. The Alakazam name is synonymous with great customer service, educated advice and honesty. So if you're shopping for new magic, make sure you check out our website, www.alakazam.co.uk, or pay a visit to our fully stocked shop.
And in addition to their incredible physical range of products, they've recently launched the Alakazam Online Magic Academy. Whether you are a full-time professional or brand new to this wonderful hobby, it's a great new way to learn magic. There's a fantastic online community and new content every single month. Because you are a Magicians Podcast listener, you can receive 20% off your subscription right now. Simply enter the code MP20 at the checkout, M for Magician, P for Podcast 20 at the checkout, and receive 20% off your Alakazam Online Magic Academy right now.
The Magicians Podcast, brought to you in association with the Magic Circle, the world's premier magical society. Are you ready to join the world's most exclusive magic club? Visit themagiccircle.co.uk to find out more.
Gigi-O, free for 30 days. Be a pro, get Gigi-O.
Ashley Turner says it really is the one-stop shop of professional gig management. What's he talking about? Well, Gigi-O, of course. Top professional magicians love using Gigi-O to manage their bookings and admin. It's an easy-to-use web-based software that takes care of your inquiries, contracts, invoices, payments, and reports. You can generate professional PDF contracts in seconds and allow your clients to agree them online quickly and conveniently. It will even automatically update the diary on your phone. Read what other magicians say about Gigi-O and take a free 30-day trial right now at getgigio.com, spelt GetGigio.com. Okay, so everybody knows you as the consultant of all these amazing shows and musicals. I'm really interested. We'll talk about some of the shows specifically in a minute, but I'm really interested when people bring you in. Do they often try and bring you in too late? That's the first thing that occurred to me, because the type of thing you do, it needs a lot of consideration quite early on. Do you end up having to turn away a lot of work because it's too late in the process and it's ultimately you're not going to be able to do a good job?
Yeah, I mean, the quick answer is yes. I do have to turn away, or choose to turn away things. And the more I've done it, the more I turn away, the more I turn down. But occasionally you can be called in late and it still works out. I mean, my second job was with the Royal Shakespeare Company. I went from Stratford East to Stratford RSC. Well, strictly speaking, it was the Barbican RSC. And it was a massive production of Jekyll and Hyde. And Ali Bongo had been working on it. And Ali Bongo, bless him, but he was very busy on the Paul Daniels show. So he literally sent a few ideas on a fax machine. And you can't do theatre magic like that. You have to be in the rehearsal room. And I learned this quite early on. You have to be part of that process. You can't, if you're going to do it, it's very time consuming, and it's not always well paid, because theatre doesn't always pay well. So you have to be willing to really, like Invisible Man, I think I was paid like £2,000 and I worked on it for like 5 months, but then it changed my life. And that would be akin to what a designer would be paid, or a lighting designer. And obviously since then I've done, bigger shows, many, much bigger shows. So that was I was called in very late, and it was terrifying, and I really didn't want to do it. And I remember being angst-ridden about it. And I thought, I'm just going to go for it. But I was terrified, and I think that at that time, even Invisible Man, it was a scary process because you didn't know if it was going to work. And I think then I realised that there was a team there as well. That it's not a thing where you have to be secretive and be sat at home and come up with this perfect solution. You can also walk into a room and go, well, look, this is the problem. I don't have a solution to it. Can we look at the scene? Can we see what this is like? Can we see what the environment is? What's the set? Talk to the lighting designer. I was very fortunate that second show, the lighting designer was a man called David Hersey, who was an absolute legend in lighting. He invented gobos, really, and he was called the King of Darkness because he was incredibly shadowy. He did Les Mis originally.
I'm a big fan of Les Mis.
And Miss Saigon and all those iconic shows. And I remember thinking, what I really need is a shadow under the shelving for this particular thing. And David Hersey was just wonderful, and he came to see Invisible Man and was really interested, and he helped me do it. And it was then I realised that actually, even sometimes late, if you have the right support, then you can make things happen. And I did have a few of, Ali Bongo had started on it, and he had some wonderful ideas. They just needed to be helped through. But sometimes, for example, Ghost and Matilda and those shows would never have happened had I not been worked with those teams before and known that things had to be in very early. And in the case of Ghost, it's probably the only big scale show of that time, or probably ever, other than magic shows like Merlin, the Doug Henning shows, where the magic illusion was the first thing in the design. And that's probably, it's unheard of really, and it hasn't really happened to me since. But I do know that incorporating it in the design, I have to have a good communication with the designer, and I will go in early and I'll say, this needs to be this, or this needs to be that. And I'll generally go through that process before I've actually signed on the dotted line, because if I feel that there isn't a collaborative team, then I know I can't do it. And it was interesting seeing Tom Noddy, the bubble guy,
the bubble guy at Blackpool.
And I want to do a lecture on this one day, and I want to call it the Bubble Cube, because he makes a bubble cube.
Yes.
Anyone
amazing.
that hasn't seen him, he says a bubble cube is impossible, right? He blows soap bubbles. So he blows 6 bubbles that are all connected together, and then he fills the centre of it with smoke. So because of the pressure of the other 6 bubbles, it looks like there's a cube in the middle. But that cube only exists because of the other 6 bubbles. And I always say that's what I do, because it doesn't really exist. It only exists in the middle of everything else. And if you burst one of those other bubbles, it won't be a cube anymore. It won't exist. So I have to have the support from those other areas. And that's both the absolute joy of what I do, and it also can be horrendous.
It must drive you crazy when it's not working.
Well, because it also, you have to, and I think maybe if I've had success with it, it's because of that thing of really being one of the team and really drawing upon those other things, not just for support, but as method. So I can use choreography as method. And I remember Darren Brown coming in to see Lord of the Rings, and there's a vanish in it, which really fooled him. And it was purely choreographic. It was Peter Darling, the wonderful choreographer who did Billy Elliot, who I had the chance to work with many times. Peter and I went into a studio. We worked with drama, dance students, and we just worked out this shape, and the shape of the choreography made the vanish happen. It's a big flaw in magic that people always think, you have to say yes to every job, and you really don't. And I think it's very important to say no to some jobs. And I say no to a lot of jobs, actually, because if I don't feel I've got a fighting chance, because it's difficult enough in a big scale musical to make something happen. But if the set's already there and you meet the director and they're not interested and you just get resistance, then it can be really hard.
I know there's a lot of people listening to this podcast that are really, really hoping that I'm going to ask you about, and hopefully you can give us some amazing insight into is your work with Ghost. Anyone who saw this in the West End, I can be blunt and just say it, will never forget it. The magic in it was just mind-blowing. What was what process did you go through with that? Did they tell you what effects they wanted? Or were you involved? It looks like you were involved right from the beginning with it.
I was. I mean, you've got to go back to 1995 to Peter Pan at the West Yorkshire Playhouse, which was the first time I worked with a director called Matthew Warchus, who is now the artistic director at the Old Vic. I still have an association with him. I'm an associate artist of the Old Vic. And Matthew loved magic. And on Peter Pan, he wanted me to do... It was a really beautiful production of Peter Pan, and he wanted me to do Tinkerbell as a ball of light. And I said, you really needed to get me in earlier. And the designer was Rob Howe, and the lighting designer was Hugh Vanstone. And we worked together many, many times. We did that show. We did Our House, the Madness musical, which had a lot of quick change in it. And it was a kind of sliding door story where the lead character has a decision to make at the age of 16 and doesn't know whether to commit a crime or give himself up, and he splits in half, and you follow both paths, like Sliding Doors, the movie. And then we did the epic Lord of the Rings, which was the most expensive and the most money-losing show outside of Las Vegas of all time. And I think it's now been beaten by Spider-Man on Broadway. So we did Lord of the Rings, and then around about Ghost time, we were also working on another little project, which was Matilda. And Matilda I was involved with many years, long before Tim Minchin. And I've got lots of scripts and Matthew kept saying, I haven't found the right composer. And one day, Matthew called me into a meeting and he said, listen to this. And he played me Miracle on his phone. And he says, anyone that can rhyme miracle and umbilical is the right person for this job.
That's the very first song, in Matilda.
And so we were working on, we were talking about Matilda. And in fact, Matthew called me in on a meeting, Matthew Warchus, and he said, there's two projects I want to talk about. One of them is Matilda, which we've actually got dates for, and I've found this great composer who's never done musicals before called, Tim Minchin. And and the other one is Ghost, based on the film. And he said, I want it to be a rock concert, a magic show, and a love story, all like rolled into one. And I want the magic to be right out front and centre on it, and I want you to lead it design wise. And it was the same designer, Rob Howe, who I'd worked with all these years before, many times on many occasions. So the producer Colin Ingram was mad enough to agree to this idea and funded a workshop in 2009, and I had the theatre in Oxford, the big theatre there. It's not the Empire.
The new theatre.
Yeah, we hired it for a week, and it was £100,000 budget to do everything that I thought would be worth exploring for Ghost. And one of the things that I was obsessed with and always wanted to do was the Blue Room, which was also known as metempsychosis, a kind of sort of dusty Victorian illusion that is very, very difficult to achieve, and no one really had seen it. Except Mike Caveney and Jim Steinmeier had done it for, and John Gorn had done it for the Magic History Conference a few years before, which was incredibly helpful because I could go to Matthew, look, actually this has been done at a magic conference. And they did this beautiful kind of sketch, and it was actually done on I think it was called The Hidden Secrets of Magic, or The Lost Secrets of Magic. So there was a video of it on YouTube, which you can look up, the Blue Room. And I said, I think this would be it would be amazing to do this in Ghost, because it would be the most breathtaking way to make Sam, appear and vanish. We didn't actually know how we were going to use it as well, but I said, I know this is worth exploring. So we built a Blue Room, and I went back to Simon York, who I'd first worked with on The Invisible Man, and we went right back to the patent drawings and kind of built this thing. And as I've said to the guys in America, that their work was invaluable, because we basically, recreated the illusion, but we knew that it kind of must have sort of worked because they'd done it. They were the only other people to have done it. But then we had to radically change it. We changed it so much that when John Gorn saw it, he couldn't work out how we'd done it, and neither could Mike Caveney.
Wow.
Because we couldn't have that box, we couldn't have that setup. It was in a musical that, it's got 25 dancers in it and scene changes and all this stuff. But of course, so we set that up, and it was incredible. Actually, it was an incredible moment, because it's a graduated mirror. The secret is it's much more practical for magicians than Pepper's Ghost, which involves a set piece of glass in a certain position. The Blue Room is a room that you can go into and out of, and it has a diagonal mirror that comes into it, and the leading edge famously graduates from mirror to glass. So when you can gradually reflect things and back again. And we didn't really know how it would work. And then they said to me, well, what colour should the room be? And I said, well, I guess it should be blue, because that's what it's called. So let's start with blue, and let's also start with LED panels, and let's just see what it is. And we set it up in Oxford, and had the wonderful Tim Lutkin, who has become a very, very dear friend and a very close collaborator. And we set this thing up and chucked some lights at it, proper theatre lights, and stood someone in this box and slid the mirror in, and it was just unbelievable.
It just faded away.
It was, you could see it, because we hadn't perfected it, and it was rough, but it was like, and it felt like discovering Tutankhamun's tomb. It felt like bringing this thing, but that hadn't been seen in the UK for 100 years. And there was a guy there called Mickey, and he was a stage carpenter, the most cynical guy you've ever, but lovely. And he'd seen everything. He worked on Peter Brook's Midsummer Night's Dream in the 70s. And he looked at you and went, that's the most amazing thing that I've seen with my own eyes. And we knew that this was something special. But this was only one moment of the show.
Yeah.
And we explored it there's people that go into each other's bodies and all this stuff. And at the end, I was like, I think we should use it for the Vanish at the end, and then I had to radically change. There was a problem that the original one is stripes of mirror. It's very technical in a way, but it's described as you scratch bits of the mirror off in wider strips, so you end up with this series of parallel lines and it's very confusing when you look at it, because it's like you're not sure what you're looking at, but it's basically a mirror with very fine lines scratched away that get wider and wider until they become glass, until they become, and but of course it was like, how wide is in the patent? It's not clear how is this the whole mirror? Is this? So I thought, well, it's got to relate to the size of a human body, so it must be like half the width of a body or something, or the width of a body. But our sight lines in a theatre, we're not talking about doing it in a little room. You're in a theatre with wide sight lines. To make everyone see it becomes a nightmare. So the whole geometry of it, and where do you hide this massive sheet of glass, and all of that. Crazy, crazy stuff. And the weight of it, mirror weighs the same as granite. It's basically the same weight, and you can't just use plate mirror because it will kill somebody. So it's like, well, what is the mirror, and how do you make it strong enough and not dangerous? And that was just one thing in Ghost. There was many, many other moments, and how do you split the people from their bodies, and
the walking through the door.
And the walking through the door, which again I tried in Oxford, and we knew we were onto something there. And so we did all this amazing workshop, and Peter Darling, the choreographer, came and helped me on it, even though he wasn't working on the show. And he's been an important collaborator right through to Groundhog Day. So I had that benefit of doing that workshop, and then I had all that stuff drawn up technically, and then we handed it to the designer, Rob Howe, and then Rob spent about a month designing, and he said, I'm ready for you to see the design. And I went to his studio in Clapham, and he designed the show with absolutely none of it in it. Absolutely none of it.
What?
Absolutely true story. And so I was like, well, Rob, what about all the stuff that we did? Oh, well, we can, there's kind of glass things on the set, we can pivot them round. And then I was like, what the heck? And then I went to Matthew Warchus. He said, I don't know what we're going to do. And I can see why. And I've since spoken to Rob about it. He's a really fantastic set designer and brilliant. He's won Tony Awards and Olivier Awards. But you don't want to be told what to do as a set designer. And he had to really come round to realising that his role on this was to support the weird, awkward geometry that all this stuff required and make it seem like it was a set that you would put into a musical. And he hated his own set. I mean, I'm sure he would say it himself. He used to do the demonstrations and say, this set wouldn't be like this if it wasn't for the illusions. The point he stopped saying that was when he was nominated for a Tony Award for the set for Ghost. And since then I said, he actually did the most incredible job on it. But it was a very difficult collaboration, and he wasn't that happy about what had to happen. And I can understand why. And I said one day, why are you so pissed off about this? He said, because normally as a designer you want all your best ideas on show, and in this all my best ideas are hidden. Because the geometry was incredible. And, he did a lot towards solving how to actually put that on stage. But that's really, and really, to design an entire musical around literally 10 seconds at the end was nuts, but it also paid off. And that's why I always say to people, when they saw Ghost, I said, I'm really pleased you saw that, because you won't see that again. And we couldn't tour it. And people said, why didn't you tour the Blue Room? And I literally said, because I didn't want to kill somebody. I was on the phone to the production manager one day when they accidentally broke this sheet of mirror, which was 4 meters by 5 meters. It was unbelievable, like this.
Wow.
They broke a number of them, just tried to make it, because you had to drill holes in it, and they didn't realise you can't, they tried to drill through the toughened glass, and then you realise we could do it another way. But nobody was injured, thankfully, during that crazy process. And every night you saw that show, that mirror was swung in and out probably 30 times, every time the set moved, but you didn't know it was there. And it only was there for when it needed to be there, and it was an amazing thing. And a great moment as well. I'll just say one other thing about Ghost, which was wonderful, as we opened on Broadway, obviously, and Joni Spina was my associate. I was very fortunate to work with Joni very closely on that. And David Copperfield came in, and of course the big talking thing amongst magicians wasn't the Blue Room, it was the walking through the door. And Bill Smith says it's the biggest fooler in magic since the Hooker Rising cards, which is the biggest compliments I've been given. And David was sat there with Chloe, his partner, and I thought I better go and see if he wants a drink in the interval. And I went and I sort of tapped him on the shoulder, and he turned round and he just had this look on his face. His mouth was wide open and he was shaking his head. And he says, I can't believe what I've just seen. And afterwards he said to me, that's the first time I've felt real astonishment for like years and years. And it's reminded me of why I do what I do.
Wow, what a compliment.
And I said, that's brilliant. Can we put it on the poster? And he did. He let us put it on the poster. And for the duration of the time that Ghost was in New York, there was a huge poster on Times Square. And it said, the first time I've felt astonished for years. David Copperfield. Unfortunately didn't give us a long run, but yeah. I'm very glad that, and I think part of that, I mean, it was a wonderful opportunity. I worked very hard on it. We had a wonderful team, lighting, the design was amazing in the end. And but that story is an amazing, there's only 2 stories I've worked on that I think are perfect stories for magic. One of them was Ghost and the other one was Invisible Man, because it's the perfect framing for magic. And I think that was it with Ghost. It was the first preview in Manchester. People responded to the magic, like in those David Copperfield specials where you hear people gasp.
Yeah,
it was like that. And I remember at the end, the director came up to me. He said, "I've never seen people applauding and crying at the same time."
That's amazing, isn't it?
And it was a beautiful thing to experience. And I was at the end of first preview in Manchester. I was in tears because it had been so difficult.
Wow, it was worth it, wasn't it? That's amazing. I want to talk to you about some of the sort of other classic musicals that are out there. Phantom of the Opera, Les Mis. Obviously we know you worked on Matilda. If you got your hands on, say, Phantom of the Opera now, that's been the same, the magic in it, since Paul Daniels did it in the 80s, would you like that as a project? What would you do to a show like that?
Well, the funny thing is I have done Phantom of the Opera twice, actually, 2 different versions. 2012, and I got a call. The first thing about Phantom is that I knew the production manager, and he said, we've got to get you in to sort the chair out. I worked very closely with this guy Shax,
which is the final moment when the Phantom disappears. Yeah,
and it's a funny story really, because I think what happened is Paul Daniels was doing his series, and Hal Prince called him in, And basically Gil Leaney did most of that stuff, who was the prop maker. And it was quite late in the process, I think. And I think the way that happened was Michael Crawford lived near Paul Daniels, where they used to live. And Michael Crawford apparently used to go running in the morning and used to pop into Paul and Debbie for a cup of tea. And he said, "Oh, you should come in and work on this." So that's how that happened. And I think Paul probably wouldn't have had much time to spend on it. And Hal Prince was a kind of genius. So he took this, in a way, it's kind of a clumsy idea. You know, the Phantom in the story has just murdered somebody, and he's descended to the lair, which is under the Opera House, and they're all pursuing him. They're all pursuing him for being a murderer, and they want to kill him. And I think they knew he wanted to vanish, but I would love to know whether originally they were planning something more dramatic at that end. But it was very beautiful, and there's this wonderful moment. He sits in the chair, and he pulls the cloth over, and on a good night he disappears. And the mask is left on the seat, which not everyone can see, so Meg has to pick it up and just do this funny last gesture, which is
and the spotlight comes in tight, thing. Doesn't it? Yeah.
And of course, this has become iconic, and it became iconic in the show. But probably the decisions around it were based probably more on practicality than anything. So in around 2000, between 2010 and 2012, Cameron Mackintosh slightly, very controversially started to do new versions of existing things that he held the rights to, which were Les Mis, Miss Saigon, and then he turned to Phantom of the Opera. And they basically had a new director, a new design, new set design. They had Maria Bjornsson's costumes, probably because they had so much stock of them. And but they got Lawrence Connor to direct it. But it was all licensed. It was Andrew Lloyd Webber and it was Cameron Mackintosh. So I go in and they said to me, "Well, we want the Phantom. Cameron wants the Phantom to disappear into the organ because they had to change it. They had to change everything about it because it would infringe the rights. Because I suppose not everyone might know that obviously when you get a musical, and this is what's happened with Ghost, you can do a version of it. You can completely restage it and do a different version, but you can get the rights to the lyrics and the music. You can't with Phantom because that's never been released. But Cameron Mackintosh can. It upset the entire existing creative team. I mean, Trevor Nunn was very, very outspoken about Les Mis because, of course, traces of the original end up. But I got to look at the end of Phantom again, and I sat down with Lawrence Connor, and I was like, the thing about this ending is they want to kill this guy. And Lawrence and I just, had this idea that in this, Paul Brown, the designer, did this one, and it was a beautiful design, and the lair was like a magpie's den. He'd stolen these props from the Opera House, bit by bit over the years. So there was a golden bed and a harp and an organ and a backcloth hanging at the back that was like a curtain, all stolen from the prop store, I guess, in these lagoons under the Opera House. And we had this idea that you'd hear them, pursuing him down into the lair. He'd sing the last line, it's over now, the music of the night. And basically he's escaping. So he puts his cloak on and he puts the mask on. And then Meg turns up, which is what happens in the current one. And she looks at him, and then the whole backcloth is pulled down and he's surrounded by people from the Opera House with guns and torches. And they confront him. And he turns to them and they raise a gun and Meg runs behind him and then the cloak falls to the ground and he's gone, and in that last moment she reaches into the cloak and takes the mask out.
That would have been amazing.
So that's what I did, and we did that in Plymouth beginning of 2012 I think, and it did a year's tour in the UK and it went to the US in 2013 and it's played absolutely constantly ever since on tour. It's not Broadway, but it's going round America. It goes round and round again, and it's been a big success, and it's an absolutely beautiful production.
And there's a flip side to that, where your work keeps going around and round, where you put all of your heart and soul into a project, and it can be over pretty quick. And Groundhog Day is similar to that, really. It did the old Vic, and it went to Broadway.
Groundhog Day happens every day.
Yeah. It went to Broadway and it closed pretty quick, didn't it? And your work on that was extraordinary for the lucky few who got to see it. That must destroy you a bit, mustn't it?
Well, I mean, the way I look at it is the musicals are so expensive to go and see that I think it's a miracle anything runs, So I've been very fortunate. There have been a couple of projects like Matilda. It's been we thought Matilda would be 6 weeks at Stratford-upon-Avon, and there it is 8 years in the West End, And when I did Matilda, I was doing Invisible Man at the same time, and I put a lot more focus on Invisible Man. I didn't really, I was doing Matilda, but I was like, well, that's Invisible Man was the tough one at Many a Chocolate Factory. So you win and you lose, and I think Groundhog Day is particularly a sad case but it's also an example of, I remember being told, show business is, 95% business and 5% show, and it's never truer than in musicals, which is all about numbers and bums on seats, and I don't think necessarily it's understood just how many bums on seats you have to get on Broadway. I mean, to say that Groundhog Day was selling $100,000 of tickets a day and therefore had to close, it gives you an idea.
It's
of how
incredible, isn't it?
So yeah, the cost it's the running costs are phenomenal. So what happened was we opened at the old Vic. It was the old team. Tim Minchin had been working on it for years. It was Danny Rubin who wrote the original movie. Matthew Warchus again, and Peter Darling, the choreographer, and myself. We didn't know which bits I'd be involved with. But again, we workshopped a lot of it. I was integral to the design of the bedroom, and I knew obviously Groundhog Day, for those who don't know, is the man that keeps waking up to the same day again and again. So there are these crazy moments where, he's lying on his bed with his girlfriend and he's in a suit and like drifting off to sleep, and the next second the alarm clock goes off and he's back in bed in his boxer shorts and all the clothes are back on the chair and hanging on the rail. And a number called Hope, where he continually tries to kill himself, and then every time he kills himself he's back in bed, and it used to bring the house down on Broadway. It was really actually thrilling to hear it, because we added another step to it on Broadway where he climbed a ladder and you saw the body fall, and then he was back in bed in the centre of the stage. A huge amount of work on those sequences, and Groundhog Day had 5 revolves. Like a revolve is
I'd never seen anything like it. Yeah, it was like a revolve within a revolve.
Yeah, there was a full stage revolve and a half revolve, and then within that half revolve were 3 revolves. So you could do these incredible. I mean, it was great for an illusion act because you could like spin these things round. And there was one moment where he climbed into a bathtub, and you see him go to breakfast, pick the toaster up, he runs the bath. Goes to breakfast, picks the toaster up, all while he's singing, plugs the toaster in, climbs in the bath, pulls the curtain, drops the toaster in, immediately back in bed. And so it meant that as the bath spun round, we could kind of sort of show it empty, because it could come round and revolve, and it did these cool moves with the bed, so it was always swapping. But I basically, Groundhog Day, what can I say? I think most musicals flop on Broadway. Most shows flop on Broadway. It's the way that the industry works. There would be no Tony Awards, there would be no set designers, there would be no prop makers, there'd be no production managers if everything ran. So Broadway actually runs on flops. It's a controversial thing to say, but it really does. If you think about it, the Tony Awards is the thing that boosts Broadway every year. You'd have no new musicals awards. Yeah. So only a certain number can succeed, and that's how the industry likes to work it. We were pretty blighted. Our first preview, the set broke down. And we had a 1 hour stop where everyone was given free drinks.
I think there was a problem with the lead. Andy Carl got injured as well.
Yeah, this was later on. All the cast did this incredible job of singing through the show and doing the whole show with music on that show. So everybody loved it. But everyone next day was talking about the cast were amazing to cover for that lousy broken set that didn't work. So from the go, you've got to get off on the right footing. Those early previews are critical, and then Andy Carl went over and tore his ACL, which is a very serious knee injury, during one of the critics' previews, and had to be substituted by the understudy, and then the understudy was on for a number of the previews, which we still got a phenomenal write-up in the New York Times review, but ironically, the producers for the opening night gift, because there's a joke all the way through saying chance of departure 90% because it's like a weather gag, and then as the days go on, it's like chance of departure 60%.
Oh, right.
And they said chances of opening 100%, But the truth was that morning we were all at the theatre at 9 a.m. with Andy Carl with a leg brace on, seeing whether he'd managed to do the show. And if he couldn't have done particularly the stuff he had to do in Hope, My Number, which was extremely athletic, they couldn't have put him on, or we'd have had to cut that number or whatever. But bless him, he was an incredible trooper. You know, that show cost, you know, the running costs were like $850,000 a week. You've got to think about the basic finance. You put a show on Broadway, it's going to cost you a minimum of $15 million before you do anything. And then every week you're running the previews, it's going to cost you $800,000 to run the show. So very quickly, you've got to be making more than that. If you've got any chance of paying off your $15 million in the first place, you've got to be taking 1.2, 1.4 million. It's like unbelievable numbers. Because if it goes the other way, you're going to be losing, if you're taking $500,000 a week, you're going to be losing an additional $300,000 a week plus. So you can imagine how that 15 million can suddenly go to, you've got to make that 16 million. And if you don't hit it quickly, then you know that all that's going to happen is the deficit is going to get more. It doesn't matter how much people are enjoying the show. And then if you don't get onto that really hot ticket on Broadway, where now, like, you know, Hamilton, they're paying, you know, $600 a ticket with premium seating. So Hamilton's taking like $2.5 million a week, and is already in profit. If you're on the other end and you start going on the half price ticket booth, you might be quite full, but you might not be even covering your running costs.
Yeah.
So there's a certain point where, I mean, we even got, you know, Bill Murray came in, support it, and we got some press, but it just wasn't doing the numbers. And I think it was partly we didn't have enough money behind it to publicise it, but also people have got a choice to go and see other things. And that season, people went and saw Ben Platt in you know, Dear Evan Hansen, and they went to see Come From Away. And unfortunately, that means that. Oh, by the way, Harry de Cruz helped me in London, because it was the same time as I was doing Mickey and the Magician and Disneyland Paris. And I threw Harry in the deep end, and he was amazing, helping on Groundhog Day. But with all that behind it, we're winning the Olivier Award and all that stuff. It's now almost impossible to get a theatre anyway, because all the big theatres have got long-running musicals. But you can sort of imagine, if you're an investor, you're going to go, I love that show, but it's got baggage to the tune of however many $1 million. But I still hope, and I really think it may well still come to London. But it's just the reality of the industry.
You've mentioned him already, actually. You've struck up a bit of friendship with David Copperfield, haven't you, over the years?
Yeah.
Can you give us an insight into the real man? You know, you're one of his rare friends, where you don't work for him, you're a friend. And so, what is it that you think sort of makes him tick? Especially these days.
Well, I think he's an extraordinary perfectionist, and I don't think that a perfectionist life is an easy life, actually, because you know, he's so perfectionist that even, I mean, I'm one of the very few people, I'm very fortunate to have been to Mushakay, you know, the island. And on one day, David, which is incredible and beautiful, but he makes decisions about everything. And he took me around the island in a little golf buggy, you know, and really showed me how it all works. And, you know, you have to purify your own water and generate your own electricity and all this stuff. But I think people that don't know David, they might not realise how incredibly involved he is in every single decision. And, you know, every nut and bolt, and, you know, what picture should hang there in that house, because he has a number of houses that he kind of, people hire the island, and there's 40 staff on there and stuff. But he chooses the colour of the thing, and he's showing me, like, oh, we found this, you know, in the shower, we found this kind of thing, and he was showing me all these details. You think, well, how does he have time for this? But his attention to detail is phenomenal, and obviously when that's applied to magic, that's why his work, you know, is so immaculate. Especially when you look at that, you know, when I first met him, which was in 1994, it was just, you know, the most incredible show he was doing. You know, I saw him do flying and snow and the vertical levitation and the death saw, you know, all live, and all those things, you know, all of that work. And I knew from Joni Spina the incredible graft behind it, because, you know, he'd not only do the, you know, 2 or sometimes 3 shows a day, but they'd be in a touring bus, and they would also be working on the new TV special. And every time they moved, they would watch the video of the show in the bus and take notes. And it was Chris Giordano and Joni Spina, and in those days, and then they'd arrive at the next venue, and the first thing off the truck would be the illusion they'd be rehearsing. So they'd get to the venue, they'd go in there, they'd rehearse it for the day, they'd bring food in until it was ready to do the show, and then they'd do the show, and they'd get on the bus and they'd do the same thing again. And that went on for like months and months and months, and then they'd record the TV special. So like working on that kind of level is, you know, for one, he's a workhorse, an absolute workhorse. Like, and even now, I know you said you've been around the museum, but David can do like 3 shows, and he'll still turn up at the warehouse and kind of do a tour. Obviously, you know, Chris Kenner's assistants and everything. But I think he's one of the most detailed people I've ever met, and you know, I think I'm really fortunate that I've only really known him as a friend, although of course we've talked immensely about magic and about material that he's developing and all of that stuff. And I did work, you know, when I first met him, I worked a little bit on the Berkeley House, but it was a really interesting insight into how he worked. In fact, I made a total klutz of myself because I didn't realise that the actual way that the Berkeley House worked, and I said, I think you could mime being sort of pulled into the house by spirit forces, and he said, I don't think that works. When I did the Bermuda Triangle, it didn't really work that way. He said, show me what you mean. And I didn't realise certain things about the way that the house was not all that it seemed to be. And I kind of did this mime thing, and I ended up tripping out behind the... It must have been hilarious. I'd love to have that on video. And he was like, see what I mean? It doesn't work. But, you know, David, very friendly with Chloe, his partner, who's absolutely lovely, absolutely salt of the earth. She does a shoe design. As I always say, he's in the show business, she's in the shoe business. She designs amazing shoes, and she was in London recently with a pop-up shop. And she's very independent. She has a very separate, you know, runs her thing separately. She's stayed in this house, you know, when she's been in London, and really very interesting, actually, but really, really down to earth. And as much as I've been fortunate enough to be flown on a private jet, you know, with David from Mushakay to Vegas, I've picked him up in my not terribly good hire car from the stage door and driven him around to, you know, Taco Bell after the show. Yeah, I think he was someone that was like just so driven and so into magic that I think for a long time there was probably not much else outside of that. And I think over the years, you know, he's got a family now, and his son was just bar mitzvah recently and stuff. And he has a life outside that as well. Although, you know, I think he absolutely loves performing. You know, he absolutely loves it, and it's wonderful that he does, because, you know, you go and see that, you know, he is probably the biggest name in magic, and he carries that sort of torch, and so elegantly now, and the preservation of the Museum of Magic, and I mean, it is just absolutely unbelievable now what's happened there. And I know there's been criticism of his collecting, because they go, well, what happens if you can't go and see it, or why? And I go, well, if Celine Dion decided to collect Art Deco posters, why would you have the right to go and see it? You know, it's like, but actually you can go and see it, and there's even a conference in, I think, 2020. There's a Minneapolis one, and the year after, if you register for Minneapolis, you get to go to the warehouse the year after, which I think David Sendy and Bill Smith are organising. So you can get in there, you can get access. It's not easy. And then people criticised him for buying the Leslie Cole collection. Leslie Cole was an eccentric English collector who every week would go around every book shop and then go down Portobello Road and buy anything on magic. And famously, I remember Billy McComb telling me, he'd like come home with a carrier bag of old stuff, and he'd hang it on a door handle that already had another carrier bag underneath it, and things were stacked up on the stairs. And at a certain point, in around 94, he bought the whole lot, and it was shipped out to Vegas, and there it lay under a tarpaulin for decades, because I remember seeing it. He said, that's the Leslie Cole collection, and one day we'll unpack it. Well, right now they're unpacking it, because it took so much space to unpack it. And people criticise it, saying, the Leslie Cole collections in America, we can't see it. I know people that knew Leslie Cole, and Leslie Cole used to get home and occasionally put the books on the table, and he'd say to anyone that was round, have a look at those books now, because I won't have a clue where they are after I put them away. So when Leslie Cole had it, you definitely couldn't see it, because it was just in plastic bags hanging off his door handles. So there's a sort of ownership about that stuff. And admittedly, I'm a friend of his, and it's, he's not always, there's stories that you hear, but you have to take people as you find them. And he's always been really lovely to me and very generous and incredibly supportive. He's seen a lot of my work on Broadway and written reference letters, done things for the posters. And yeah, I think I really, really cherish that. And I guess I'm not competing. I'm not a performer, and he loves theatre, so we have that overlap. And yeah.
Paul, this has been absolutely amazing. Thank you. It's been a totally unique podcast. As I said to you when we walked here this afternoon, there's nobody else really who has a career like yours. So thank you so much for sitting down with me and talking to me.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
If you'd like to find out more about Paul Kieve's work, visit his website, stageillusion.com. That's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed it. We will, of course, be back again next Friday for another brand new episode of The Magicians Podcast. I will see you then. Have a great one. Take care. Bye-bye.